So just actually, for those of you that were not here yesterday, just really briefly what we have been seeing. The topic of yesterday I could really summarize in a way like trying to introduce the concept of nanotechnology in buildings. Having said that, we basically actually looked at a couple of big families of products that have been receiving some increasing interest over the last decades or so for the building industry. They were both actually products that were pretty common already 30, 40 years ago, but only in the last decade they've started actually being introduced in buildings more consistently. When I'm speaking about nanotech in buildings, in reality we're discussing about products that have a kind of a nanometer scale that can be actually going from a few nanometer, which is this case, up to something that goes into the range of 100 nanometers. Okay? So that's basically the scale we are working. And we really actually saw a couple of large families. We really actually saw a couple of large families of products. The majority of the talk yesterday was about the fact that often people speak about aerogel, often people speak about PCM, but unless you are really kind of familiar with the field, often you don't realize that these are families of products. There's not one single product that can actually have this title, but the reality is that there are hundreds of products here, there are hundreds of products here. So, number one request is don't pretend to be an expert of everything. I'm not an expert at all of everything. The reality is I'm really often working on a sub-family of these kind of products, and the same thing with the second family of products. Okay? So we basically, what we saw yesterday is, what are the main characteristics of these families, which are the principles for selecting the best product, and how do you judge actually one product versus another product. Okay? In terms of principles. So first one, we looked at PCMs. Now these are products that are typically considered these days for doing thermal energy storage. So somehow we aim actually to capture the latent heat through actually a phase change. So the reality of these products is that the only thing that they can be able to do for you is basically store like a battery a large quantity of energy. Now that's actually what you want from these materials. But the reality is, different products will give you different kind of effects. Number one aspect is, what's the density of energy I can store in these products? Okay? So ideally, these are batteries. The more capacity a battery has, the better it's going to be. So somehow, you should always actually look for products with a very high entropy. Unfortunately, the products with a high entropy also have a lot of problems. And we investigated yesterday the main kind of families of problems of these products. Number one, they typically are really inconsistent. Number two, they are really unstable. So what that means actually they behave in a certain way when they are fresh and freshly produced, and then a year later they change their state. Now in buildings, because buildings typically last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, the duration, the long-term actually capacity to have always a consistent effect is the main property for the selection process. And so when we look about these products for buildings application, then we need to start introducing these characteristics. Another actually characteristic that often is not really well considered when people speak about thermal energy storage is that they're not really elastic material. So often they do something when they're fresh and something different when they're old, or they do something when they're melting and something different when they're freezing. We typically call this subcooling effect. And you don't want to have it in buildings because you know that you're not going to be able to control that. So often in the process of selecting the best phase change material, you need to look at a lot of the fresh properties, but also what's going on once that product gets introduced into a building. So we look at a series of inorganic products and a series of organic products. The reality is, more commonly these days in building we are trying to introduce organic products. The reason for it is because an inorganic product, so a salt, typically may have a corrosive behavior when it touches an aluminium or an iron bar or anything that is a metal. Now because in our building we have quite a lot of metals, nobody wants to use something that may actually interfere with another material into the building. So theoretically speaking, an inorganic product is a product that often has a higher density of thermal energy storage capacity. So theoretically speaking, these products may accumulate more energy. And that's the reason why these products are typically used in industrial applications. But once it comes to buildings, then you don't want to use these because they interfere with concrete, cement, gypsum, mortar, and these kind of things. So you don't want actually to have that kind of problem. And so you start actually introducing organic products. Now, in the organic family, you typically have a large variety of products. More commonly these days, people are using paraffins, but they are pretty expensive, and so people more and more commonly these last few days have been looking at fatty acids or any other organic oil-based, agricultural-based PCM. Okay? Now, if you look at these products, the reality is they have a very low density of energy storage. So they work well, but they don't really allow you to accumulate a huge quantity of energy. Another big problem of these products is that typically they have a low thermal conductivity. So the process of storing energy, so the process of charging and then later on discharging these products is pretty slow. So they don't really facilitate a kind of a turnaround of the energy capacity. But, you know, they're still actually the best option these days that we can consider. And even in that family, you know, paraffins, there are almost actually 400 different paraffins that you can select. And there are at least actually pretty commonly available 50, 60 fatty acids that people use in the building industry. Now the reason why I'm giving you these numbers is because I want actually to be kind of clear in the concept that a lot of people present and think, oh, I'm an expert of PCMs, but the reality is you're probably an expert of a subcategory of a particular kind of PCM. Okay? So it's really hard to have a full control of the entire spectrum of products available. Second topic yesterday has been about hydrogen. And you know, the approach has been basically the same one that we use for PCMs. First one, this is a family of products. It's not a single product. Okay? It's kind of an old family of products, first time introduced in 1931, so kind of 80 years old family of products. Then, you know, really neglected for almost 50, 60 years. Then in the 90s, they were starting to be reintroduced back again. And the reason is because, you know, the product that was used in the original hydrogen was too expensive to be considered for applications that were not really NASA related. Okay? So these products were used as kind of super insulating materials for aerospace applications and not really for anything beyond that. Now over the last 2 decades, the pipe and oil industry has started considering the value of a super insulating product, and more recently even the building industry is starting considering it. Now what I mean by super insulating product, typically, you know, the majority of building codes, they pay quite enough attention to the R value, the U value, the thermal conductivity of your walls. Okay? And you know, in frame construction, when you start having a structural in concrete or steel, whatever, and then you have the opaque wall, you typically put an insulating layer. So in our buildings, typically you always have an insulating layer, mineral wool, fiberglass, cellulose, whatever actually you introduce. And those are actually typically products that have a thermal conductivity in the range of 0.04, 0.05, and in the best case, 0.03. Okay? Watt meter Kelvin. So that's typically what we consider a good insulating material. Now over the last actually 2 decades, a new families of products has been introduced, and these are actually products with thermal insulation that go as low as 0.01. Okay? So basically they give you the same effect with a third or a fourth of the typical thickness of a traditional insulating product. Now, clearly, if you have a product that insulates more, that gives you huge amounts of advantages. Because it allows you to make the same actually air value in a wall with a much thinner layer. It allows you to kind of avoid thermal bridges more easily because you don't have to go around actually beams within our time. Okay? So it's pretty good. But any single time you have a benefit, there's always a problem. Okay? And the problem in this case is that these products, first of all, until recently they were extremely expensive. They are still expensive, a bit less than usually, but they are still pretty expensive. Number 2, they were not really tested for a long time. So there is not really that much knowledge about what is going on with this product in the long term period. And last but not least, people are not familiar with these products. They're a bit strange, and people are afraid that they don't really work as they pretend to work. So what has been going on over the last decades is people have been introducing these topics in buildings. They've started actually testing, they've started monitoring, and nowadays we have actually at least a decade of continuous monitoring of different products. Which products? Typically at least blankets, mortars, and plaster. Those are the three big families we discussed yesterday about aerogel enhanced products. Now first of all, look at the aerogel again. And the reason why I put the S at the end is because aerogels, there are actually hundreds of different aerogels. They can be silicium based, they can be aluminum based, they can be carbon based. So you can use different raw materials. You can have a silicium, which is the one I typically use in my lab, but I know different actually labs use carbon or aluminum. The reason why I use silicium is because typically silica gel is a cheaper material than an aluminum gel. Okay? And you can typically produce it at a pressure that is lower, it is easier to control in a small lab. But if you have a huge lab with a huge evacuating chamber, people have been using different actually raw materials for aerosols. Okay? So this is basically number one aspect. Look at actually what's going on. And once you have an aerogel, typically this aerogel is like a powder, so it's sand. It's very, very fine sand. Typically the particles in the range of 200 nanometer, and then if you actually see the material structure, typically the beds is composed by little particles from 3 to 4 or 5 nanometer all together in a bed. Okay, so this is a very, very fine-tuned material. And this fine-tuned material gets typically introduced in a porous layer. In a porous layer means once you are preparing that mix of a porous layer, it can be a plaster or a mortar, you put this sand, you typically remove an aggregate, and the final effect of the combined product with an aerogel into a traditional product will give you a lower thermal conductivity. Now here are typical kind of benchmark of current products. These are the thermal conductivity at 24 degrees Celsius in kind of average relative moisture content. Okay? So mortars, so cement-based products. In a normal mortar would probably have a thermal conductivity in the range of 0.7, 0.8 watt meter Kelvin, and people have been introducing more and more aerogel up to quantity in the range of 70% in volume, so 10% in weight, and typically have been able to show final thermal conductivity in the range of 0.03. So basically a factor of an order of magnitude less than the material without the aerogel. The problem of this is that you start from a very highly conductive product like a cement-based mortar to make an insulating layer. It's a bit rude, it's a bit strange, where are you going to use it? So more actually recently people have been focusing on these first two categories of products, the plasters and the blankets. So value of plasters, you can actually shape them in any way you want. You can use in historical building. So if you are actually a person that is looking for kind of retrofitting and putting some insulation on a vault, on a dome, or any kind of curved shape, where you will never be able to kind of customize an insulating layer, this is probably a very good option. The option is as good as actually much better and much more insulating than a traditional insulating material. In other words, you're going to use actually thermal conductivity, a product with a thermal conductivity in the range of 0.025, 0.028. And there are many actually products that have been started commercializing with these kind of ideas. Okay? There's one in Switzerland, there's one in Germany, a couple one in North America. So there are actually different products already available. You can actually start having pretty thick layers of the plaster, like a few centimeters, 3, 4. That really will act as an insulating layer. Okay? The bad side of this is all the plastics starts to be wet. Okay? So to make plaster you need water, and in many building industry sectors, people do not want to use water at all during construction because it slows down the process. So what we have been using pretty often in North America are aerogel enhancer blankets. Okay? So these are thin layers, thin kind of panels. I showed yesterday a few of these panels. And so, these are layers that are typically being commercialized or introduced or studied with a few millimeters. You have just realized that as soon as I was dropping actually the aerogel blanket, that the aerogel was basically flying. And that gives you how thin and actually slim is the layer. So the aerogel gets attached to a fiberglass, but as soon as I drop, the aerogel is basically escaping. Okay? These are products with thermal conductivity these days in the range of 0.013, with a kind of somehow declared value of 0.01 as an approximation. So it's a very kind of highly insulating product. Okay? It works very well for what it has to do. It's kind of easy to be shaped, even in a curved. So it has a good kind of series of properties. So what we have seen yesterday, first of all, we have seen the pristine condition of this product. In other words, the freshly produced pristine condition of the product. So what's the thermal conductivity? What's the density? So these are, for example, products with a density of 70, 80 kilogram per cubic meter. So you have a cubic meter of product, only weighs actually 70 kilos. So for people kind of looking at life cycle analysis of these products, people are often happy about the fact that you don't really need actually huge weight, and so transportation environmental impacts are pretty minimized by the fact that there is no mass. You don't need actually huge thick layer, so at the end of the day, per functional unit you're going to have a very thin layer that you need to adopt, because you get a very good effect in terms of thermal insulation without having to use a lot of material, and that's a kind of another good advantage. Then actually we looked at some real application. So I showed you a few buildings. We have been introducing these products, and we have started looking at what's going on. What's going on is mainly related with the fact that these products often have a series of aged conditions that may actually deteriorate or kind of change the properties of these products. That's basically all we have touched yesterday. Kind of what's the effect of, let me see if I can actually show you the presentation. What's the effect of high temperature? What's the effect of freeze-thaw cycles? What's the effect of high moisture content, so high relative humidity? What's the effect of UV or other actually properties? It's also important to remember that I work in Canada, and that's pretty cold climate, and that's why we pay huge attention to the freeze-thaw cycle in general. Because we have actually a lot of cycling of building materials and building layers that have to go above and below zero. And unfortunately, when there is moisture content, so when a product is kind of moisturized in somehow, and it goes around zero often, the reality cracks because water content, water vapor expands in volumes. One actually goes around zero, and that actually may deteriorate the products. And so the majority of the work we have been doing is not only to look at the pristine condition. For those kind of things, marketing and industries are pretty good in giving us the best possible value, but we are looking at what's going on in the field. What are the challenges that the product is going to actually have to survive in the field, and what's going to be the aged condition final product characteristics. Okay, so that's basically what we have been looking at yesterday, and here you see the different kind of slides and the different results. Okay, any question, you can always reach me, your my email. So what are we going to do today?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Because of this characteristic of the pores and everything that we saw, when we are using it as a plaster, as a finishing of the indoor environment, how about the air quality?
Okay, so good question and not easy answer. Okay. So first of all, this has been declared a completely non-toxic product, so don't worry about that. You're not going to inhalate it, if that's actually your first number of issue. Secondly, I will never leave this. So this is not, it's not a cancer-related product, okay? So it has been tested for these kind of things.
Yeah.
However, nobody wants to, touch a product that can be stick in your hand. So it's kind of really dusty product. So in other words, you will never use this kind of products as the final finishing layer of your envelope. In other words, it will always be an intermediate layer covered on both sides by something else.
How about the plaster?
Same thing with the plaster. So the plaster is actually the raw plaster. And then in Italy you use a rasante, which basically is the finally finishing layer. Because this plaster, if you remember the photo that I actually showed you, comes really rude. The surface is not really flat. Okay? So typically on top of the plastic you will always use actually a finishing layer that has a bit more kind of flat characteristics. So even when it is a plastic, it will never be the final plastic. Even if this is, for example, your blanket and you use this for an external insulation, you typically cover it somehow. It can be, kind of another kind of small plastic layer, it can be a quartz painting. It always is going to not really be the product you see. And one of the reasons is, more than you being kind of dusty, the reality is, this was the external layer, the external insulating layer, and it was raining on top of it, it will have washed out all the average. Okay? So rain will have actually removed all the average over time. So you don't want actually to risk the fact that you put your product outside and rain will make that product disappear. So any questions? So this is basically a recap of what we have seen yesterday. And again, if you have any question, please feel free to ask me now, later, coffee break, or anytime actually you want. You have my contact. So what are we going to do today? We are going to actually expand the scale. We started from things that are really in the nano range, and then we are actually starting to look at bigger things, okay? I mean, at the end of the day, my goal is to show you the City of Toronto application of these kind of ideas, okay? So really how this kind of thing can be implemented at the city scale. So I'm going to actually scale up the application. But really, another thing that we are going to see today is still keep working on what's the effect of these products in the field. Because labs, often give us perfect kind of characteristics and characterizations, but especially in North America, at the end of the day, the university has always been asked to provide assurance to the building sector that the product will work effectively in the field. In other words, our mission, my university mission, if you see the statement of my university, is not to allow our faculty to make a couple of more publications. Nobody cares about that too much. The reality is really being able to discover new things that may be applicable and may be actually adopted in the real field. So somehow actually we are really highly interested in trying to understand in the real field condition, once the material gets aged, what's going on. So number one, and let me actually turn off the lights so you probably will see a bit better. And you will not sleep probably. Just go. Let's see. We do this way. Okay, so this is one of the second last slide I was showing you yesterday, and this is about kind of a study we did recently on the introduction of aerogel layers in real buildings. This is a building, an hospital in Toronto, the new Toronto Hospital. This is actually the condo that I see every single morning in my house because it's just in front of my house. And so when you see these products applied in real field, you start seeing that, okay, the insulation layer is something, but then in the field people apply with fastening or kind of put other layers to attach these. So even if the core of this product in a lab will have given you a very low thermal conductivity, the real field application gets, kind of really decreased by the fact that you have all these kind of nail and steel and iron bar everywhere. And think about this. It's not really super common in Italy, but in Canada everything gets done with aluminium. For people doing thermal studies, you probably realize that aluminium is one of the best thermal conductive material. So we typically are using material with a thermal conductivity above 200 meter Kelvin, and then we are surrounding this product with a material with a thermal conductivity of 0.01. It doesn't make sense, because we are creating a thermal bridge somehow here that you want to be reduced just next door. And so, we have been looking at these kind of characteristics. Another characteristics that we often have seen over the last few years in my center is what's going on when the material gets kind of wet. And is a wet material then later on dry gonna go back to the original product properties or not? The reality is, for example, fiberglass are really not going to go back. Because a fiberglass structure will collapse when there is water, and when it goes back, it basically doesn't really give you any more the original thickness. So you have a 10 centimeter thick fiberglass. If you water it, so if you put some water on top of it, it starts reducing the thickness. And even if later on you put it into the oven and you remove the water, the thickness at that point is collapsing, and you only get actually at the end of the day a layer of 3-4 centimeters. So what originally used to be a 10 centimeter layer, later on is going to have actually less than half of the thickness and less than half of the thermal conductivity. Okay? So that's typically what's going on. Another characteristics that we have been often seeing in our kind of studies is this one. You're probably not really too familiar with this graph and this series of graphs, but I want to tell you something that's probably worth it to know. How many of you know actually this standard? 580 or 6639 if you use the EXA standard. This is actually standard to measure the thermal conductivity. Okay? So do you know how the thermal conductivity gets measured? By case, have you ever done any flux meter measurement in the lab downstairs? It's actually 2-week flux meter. There's actually not box in this department too, so you probably should be somehow familiar with thermal conductivity assessment. What do you do about thermal conductivity? Okay, let's actually go back to physics, not thermodynamics one. Okay, what is the thermal conductivity of a product? What's the thermal conductivity of a product? Sorry?
It's about the study of the heating flux.
Yeah, so it's the property that measures the capability of material to allow any flux across its section. I mean, if you go back to the Fourier equation, and you remember the flux, it's basically nothing more than the product of the thermal conductivity of a material, which is a material property, so it's different for steel, for kind of iron, for plastic, for tissue, and then it's kind of a product of the area of the material, so bigger area, more influx going on, little area, little influx going on, and is a product of the temperature difference on the two sides of the material. Okay?
Usually it's linear.
So usually, if you get actually 1 degree difference, Celsius or Kelvin, doesn't matter. If you get a 1 by 1 meter kind of layer, if you measure the heat flux, basically that will give you the thermal conductivity of that product. Boom. And typically, somebody was saying it's linear. In other words, if you put 22 here and 23 here, or if you put 10 here and 11 degree here, you should have the same effect. So if there is 1 Celsius difference, 1 Kelvin difference, left and right, no matter actually which are the values, if it is 10 and 11, or 15 and 16, or 30 and 31, basically should always get the same heat flux, and basically should always get the same thermal conductivity. Fortunately, that's only true in theory. Okay? In practice, go to the field tomorrow morning, ask Andrea or Hannah Laura to actually make you measurements of it, and you will realize that that's not the case. Okay? And in fact, if you look at this standard, it is the standard that gives you actually how to measure the thermal conductivity of the product, it asks you exactly the temperature at which you need to do the measurement. Okay? In US, we do the measurement at the temperature of 23.8 Celsius. And the reason why we do 23.8 Celsius, we're not really stupid, but we do at 75 Fahrenheit. Okay? In Europe, the ISO standard asks you to do the thermal conductivity at 20 degrees. Okay? Now, is there any difference between 20 and 23 degrees? No. So the fact that European people typically do measurements at 20 degrees average, and Americans do measurements at 23.8 Celsius average, it's not really a big deal. Okay? However, what's going on if the product is not at that temperature? Because you have to realize that you don't use an insulating layer to stay at 20 degrees. I mean, the real reason why we put insulation in our building It's because there is either a huge high temperature or there is a very cold temperature. If the outdoor condition was 20 degrees, we don't need an envelope actually. Okay? So you don't need an insulating layer if you have this comfortable condition. The only reason why you put an insulating layer is because outside is cold, it's chilly, it's 0 degrees, and inside you want to have 20 degrees, and so somehow you need to put a layer that allows you that the 20 degrees inside and the 0 degree outside, they don't really will give you a huge influx, because an influx will be an energy loss, and an energy loss will mean an energy consumption and an energy demand of your building. Okay? So, we do, and this is actually pretty interesting to kind of think about. We do measurements to characterize products at a temperature where that product will never be of interest for us. Okay? So there is no interest in knowing the thermal conductivity of a product at 20 degrees. Why we have been doing that? Well, the only reason why we have been doing that is because it's easy. Because it's easy to put 21 year and 20 year, it's easy to put this temperature in a lab. But in reality, these products in Toronto or in northern part of Canada will have to work at minus 20. Okay? So we have to work at a very, very low temperature. What's going on at that temperature? Now, what's going on typically for most of the material, the majority of the material, is that the lower the temperature, the lower the thermal conductivity. In other words, at very cold state, when a material is super kind of exposed to chilly condition, the thermal conductivity is going to be lower. And if the thermal conductivity is going to be lower, the Fourier equation will tell me that it will not go through. What that means is that by doing measurements at 20 degrees, the standards guys were smart enough that they were giving us a safety coefficient. In other words, I do actually all my simulation at 20 degrees, but if I put my layer at 0 degrees, it acts much better. And that's not too bad. Okay? So that's basically an additional resistance that is happening in the field that typically we don't consider, because we actually put the properties of the products at 20 degrees and then the product is at 0 degrees, and it's not that bad. You know where these kind of concepts start being actually problematic these last few days? In Abu Dhabi. You know why? Because in the Emirates, they've started putting significant codes for thermal insulation, but their main problem is their roof at 50, 60 Celsius. Because the insulation in their roof will be exposed to a huge radiation, 12 hours a day, non-stop across the year. So because the product is going to be at 50 or 60 Celsius, their thermal conductivity is going to be higher than the value that we measured at 20 degrees. So you do an assessment at 20 degrees and you are underestimating the energy demand of that building. Because at 50 degrees, that roof will conduct more heat than you anticipated it will have conducted. Does it make sense? And the reason why it makes sense is because higher temperature will create more Brownian movement of the air particle in the porosity of the product. So the air will move faster, that's basically the temperature of the product. The temperature in Kelvin is nothing more the state of agitation of the molecule. So the molecule moves faster, transfer heat by convection more effectively, the heat flux overall is going to be higher. Okay? So, because the majority of the codes, when they look about insulation, always look at cold state. We put it actually codes for winter, not for summer, historically. Only recently we have started looking at the summer demand. But historically, 15 years ago, nobody had an air conditioning system, at least in Italy. These days, heat pumps are everywhere. When you go to a facade of a building, you see a heat pump everywhere. So the reality is, because the codes were often, designed for the winter period, this kind of value of the thermal insulation was not really kind of considered. Now, this is the result of different products. Okay, just look at some of them. Mineral wool. Okay, the typical rock wool that you see. This is the thermal conductivity. At 20 degrees, it gets a value around 0.04. Okay. Now if you go at 50 degrees or 60 degrees and you look this value, it will become 0.05. So basically an incremental value of 20 something percent. Okay? So in other words, if you're designing for Abu Dhabi and you don't take into account this, you easily may have actually underestimated the energy demand of your building by 20%. The reality in Canada is that we use historically a lot of mineral wool, and we use the product here, but then effectively the product will stay here or even lower. So we will have actually saved 25%. Because there is more actually, like there is less heat flux than we anticipated that it will have outlet. Okay? And that's why the codes were okay with that kind of characteristics. Similarly, here you see kind of some different products for different moisture content. So what's going to happen if a material gets wet? Well, the more water content the product has, the more it will conduct more effectively heat. Okay? So every single time you look at the thermal conductivity of a product, you need to know that the lab that has been performing the test has been basically testing that product at the relative humidity of 50% and the temperature of 20 degrees or 23, depending if that lab has been doing the testing according to the ISO standard or the STM standard. Okay? But to give you the sense, 50% of relative humidity for the majority of products means a moisture content in weight of 5%. Okay? So most of the products are tested around here. If we completely super dry the product, then typically the product will have a lower thermal conductivity. Fair enough, that's good. But what if that product is going to be wet? What if the product is this wet? Can you see that this is pretty kind of condensed fiberglass on an attic roof in Toronto? You can see it's really wet. The reality of this product is that this product will not be here, will be here. And the thermal conductivity, if a mineral wool, the one that I was just showing you, is not going to be 0.01, 0.05. It's going to be something like in the range of 0.3, 0.4. So 6, 7 heat times actually higher. Okay? Now, where I'm going to actually bring you in reality? I'm bringing you to the fact that thermal conductivity is number one property when we discuss the values of an envelope. Everybody wants to know the U value of the envelope. What's the thermal conductance of that envelope? But you need to understand that in the field, the theoretical evaluation of the thermal conductivity may be completely different from what you theoretically anticipate it to be. And the reason why that is the case is because effectively in the field, a product gets at a different temperature, a product gets at a different moisture content, dynamically across the year. So you can have, think in this way. In Canada, we typically have the kind of continental climates of Vancouver, which is super wet, and the continental climate of Montreal, which is super dry. From a moisture content point of view, you typically don't anticipate, you don't actually pretend to think that it's going to be different thermal conductivity, but in reality, that's pretty kind of commonly happening. So what we have been doing? Well, we have actually been looking at thermal conductivity results for a lot of kind of innovative products, and we've been starting looking at what are the effective conditions of these products. Now let me actually clean this board. Can I actually clean it if it's not really common for you? Because I want to tell you something that is probably something you can apply in research activity these days. So when it comes to thermal conductivity, the majority of people look at technical sheet and take a value. Rock wool 0.04, fiberglass 0.055. Okay? They present to think that the thermal conductivity of a product is a single value. Okay? That you take actually a product, you know the thickness, you multiply the two by each other, you got actually thermal resistance of that product. But the reality is, thermal conductivity may be a function. Now, number one, moisture content will give a linear function. So more moisture content, more thermal conductivity. So for one second, let's put apart the moisture content, because we understand what it means. More water in the material, more actually thermal conductance in that product. Okay? But what's going on for temperature? Now, typically, temperature will have also a linear effect. In other words, temperature will also have traditionally an impact on the thermal conductivity. That if you are at a lower temperature, the thermal conductivity will get lower, and if you are at high temperature, thermal conductivity will be higher. Because we test and design our buildings for winter, effectively the thermal conductivity is often lower than anticipated to be, so effectively the layer is going to be more insulated. The problem is, some of actually products do not follow this linear trend, and they have very strange kind of pattern of the thermal conductivity. Okay? So I'm going to actually show you some of the last 3 years results that we've been doing on 4 materials. Okay? Now 4 materials are by far the most common insulating material in Canada, for a couple of reasons. We like actually to spray the insulating layer on a wall, because we have actually codes that are really, really tough in our tidiness. Okay? So the majority of North-American codes, they don't really prescribe extremely problematic values in terms of R, or thermal conductance and thermal resistance of the envelope, but they're really prescriptive when it comes to the air tightness of the envelope. Okay? So they want actually to have very good air barrier. Okay? So because we want actually to make sure that we seal completely the envelope, often we like to spray the insulating, because that actually will close all the cavity. Instead of putting a layer, they will always have edges and boundary across which the air can move. We spray completely the envelope to make sure it gets actually completely sealed. Okay? Number 1 actually product these days are the polyurethane or the polyisotriangulate. Okay? But historically, a decade ago, EPS and XPS were really common too. I'm going to show you some actually of these products and some of the effects of these products for a very basic principle. Because these products, have been changing quite significantly over the last 2 decades. And why they've been changing? Again, we go back to Canada. They've been changing because over the last 2 decades, actually 30 years, so in the last 3 decades since the Montreal Protocol, legislation internationally has agreed that we need to change and look carefully at the gas that we use. Because we have actually realized that a lot of the gas that we use it to have a very, very high global warming impact, and so we cannot use any more CFC gases. Now CFC gases were the most common gases in polyurethane 30 years ago. Or the same actually spray that you use it in your house, often in many kind of little containers. And then, in the mid of the 90s, they were banned. You basically had to get rid of it. And so the foam industry have started looking at new kind of gases. We went actually first of all to HCFC, so added actually chlorofluorocarbon. And then, more recently, we have started actually seeing a way to get rid of the carbon. Okay, because it's that carbon in the equation that really gives you actually a high global warming potential. Now these days, last September, there was a new actually directive in Montreal that was signed that basically is asking the industry to revolutionalize and actually completely ban carbon from those actually gases. Okay? So I'm going to actually show you a research activity we've been performing over the last 2 years about the effect of these different gases. Because unfortunately, although it's clear the pattern, it's clear that we are substituting most of the foam materials, the gas we use, because we want to reduce the environmental impact of these gases. Every single time a company changes the gas, the reality is they use actually a proprietary approach not to declare the gas they've been using. Okay? So if you go to a manufacturer and you go and buy a door panel, for example, they will never tell you the gas that is inside the foam. And the reason why they don't tell you is because typically it's patent, and typically it's their value, it's their market value. Okay? So they don't tell you what's going on in these gases. But unfortunately, this has a lot of impact. And one of the most interesting impact that this gas has is, what's going on in most of these gases? You basically blow the insulation, and the insulation layer now will form and expand in volume. And it expands in volume because we have put actually gas that is like a mushroom, okay? Basically, to give you the effect. It expands very quickly in the first few minutes. But unfortunately, after it has been, expanded and fully matured, it starts escaping from the board. And the board basically has this gas escaping, and the gas gets replaced by water, and gets replaced by water vapor, and gets replaced by air. And the reality is the thermal conductivity of the majority of these products, they're super good in theory. But when you go to the aged condition, they tend not to be as good as, theoretically speaking, we anticipated them to be. Okay? In other words, you put actually in layer, you pretend to think that that is a layer with an R value of 5, then you go and measure with a neat flux 3 years later, and the R value has been reduced to 3.2. So typically it's actually an order of magnitude at least 50% actually lower. So it's a big problem once you actually rely on these layers to insulate. Again, the reason why this is happening is because the blowing agent escaped the matrix of the gas, and now water content through the vapor form enters into the material. Okay? So, we have been comparing these different products, mineral wool, fiberglass, polyurethane, XPS, polyisocyanurate, so a bunch of different products, and what I'm going to actually show you, it's another series of lab characterization of this product. Okay? So this is, our starting point. For products, this is just one of many graphs you're going to see in the next few minutes. So you see fiberglass, rock wool, polyisocyanurate, and XPS. Now typically, standard STM 518 pascals to do the measurement at 23.8. Okay, so at 24 Celsius. Okay, you measure the fiberglass, the typical pink, really soft insulating layer, and this is the thermal conductivity once you bring from -10 up to 50. Okay, now this is true everywhere we do the test. Okay, so you take actually fiberglass, go downstairs, do the measurement, and instead of doing the measurement only at 20 degrees, do the measurement at 0, at -10, or at 10, or 50, or 60, or whatever temperature. Now, often people do not do that because they don't have actually tools that allow to know the thermal conductivity at this low temperature. So if an alarm brings you later on to the lab downstairs and you try to measure the thermal conductivity of a product, typically what you find is a linear trend. And if the material is pretty kind of porous, the linear trend is kind of pretty evident. If the layer is really solid and the density is high, the material typically flats, and so it doesn't have a significant steep on the curve. Okay, but typically thermal conductivity always will reduce with the temperature. So if you have actually to look at the thermal conductivity of different products, you see here fiberglass, rock wool, so a mineral wool, and then two foam materials. You will probably see, according to the 518 standard, that the best product is going to be probably the product with the lowest thermal conductivity, which by case in this example is a polyisocyanurate. Okay, so this is a foam material. That's really the main value why foam materials are pretty common in North America. Not really that common here, for a reason that you will actually discover in a moment. But if you go to North America, XPS, CPS, polyisocyanurate, they typically have 70% of the roofing kind of market, and typically at least 50% depending on the city of the wall market. Okay? And they're pretty good, but see what's happening at their thermal conductivity. The thermal conductivity is really unstable. Gets designed and organized to have the lowest point in the range of 20 degrees, where you anticipate we don't really care about the thermal conductivity. And as soon as actually the product gets hotter or gets actually colder, their thermal conductivity changes significantly. And if the thermal conductivity increases, basically the thermal resistance of the final layer reduces. Okay? Now, this is something that typically manufacturers will never tell you. Because they love actually to use the standard that force them to give you the thermal conductivity at 23, 22 degrees to give you actually this value, but not to declare the problem they may suffer at a lower temperature. Okay? Now, this kind of work is pretty common, as I was telling you, typically in the Emirates or in the Southeast Asia, because they've started actually being interested in understanding what's going on when an insulating layer gets used at 30, 40 degrees. Because at that temperature, thermal conductivity typically increases, And as soon as increase, the thermal resistance actually is not anymore what you expected. Okay? So, let me actually jump to some kind of products that we've been comparing and developing with Dow company, because they were actually interested. So they came up to us a couple of years ago, and they were actually interested in comparing different pentane gas. So different gases that they don't have anymore any fluorocarbon in the chain. Okay? Because there is a pretty interesting ongoing series of attention from the foam industry to get rid completely of fluorocarbons atoms in order to go completely to pentane gases. Okay? So we have started working on what kind of first, second, third, or fourth generation of gases may provide us with better products. Okay? And the reason why we've been doing this is because they have realized that these kind of gases, they're more volatile and they are actually less environmentally impactful. Unfortunately, escape the foam much more easily. So the reality is that these products get into the foam, they seem to be effectively, but as soon actually you start being exposed in this layer to a dark condition, they start actually having the gas escaping and kind of water vapor entering into the product, and these layers are not anymore consistent in the long term. So I'm going to show you some results to give you the sense of the final products. So here you see across temperature, the thermal conductivity for disclosure, I'm not giving you the name of the products. These are, I already told you the company, these are all their products, basically. But just to give you the sense, the kind of study they're interested in. There are products that have a pretty flat behavior, so across temperature, they don't really suffer a temperature effect of the thermal conductivity. And that basically means, okay, they're stable, reliable, they can be used, in Abu Dhabi roof or in Toronto roof without actually that significant problem. In other words, they sell these products with the thermal conductivity, and in the field, the product will act with that thermal conductivity. But there are some products that actually are doing very strange behavior. These are typically all the polyisocyanates. Okay? All the isocyanurate chains typically suffer low temperature behaviors. Now, when I say suffer, look at this. They typically sell products with a thermal conductivity at 20 degrees. These products have thermal conductivity of 0.02, 0.025. And as soon as actually the product is on a roof on a cold climate, so at minus 20, the products start having actually thermal conductivity of 0.04. In other words, we have put actually 20 centimeter thickness of the material, and in reality, at the real field condition, you only have the effect of 10 centimeters. Okay, so it's a big problem for these kind of companies that we have been starting working. And if that's not enough, these are all pristine conditions. These are all conditions as soon as the gas gets actually inhalated into the foam. But a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, the gas is not anymore here, and all these curves will shift actually up significantly. That's actually something that the mineral industry for insulating products is these days trying to start passing as an information to potential customer. Like a mineral wool and fiberglass somehow are much more stable than foam materials. Because the foam actually ages much more poorly than we anticipated to be. And that has not been the case historically, just to let you know. Historically, as soon as we use the CFC gases, so before the Montreal Protocol, the foam material had very, very good products. But with the Montreal Protocol, and as soon as we start enforcing these companies to go for more environmental friendly gases, we've started seeing products that are a bit kind of poorer in their performance. So just to give you the sense of what's going on with these gases, this is the same polyurethane. Again, I'm not declaring for disclosure reasons the name, but just to give you the fact of these products. This is the best product I was showing you before, the one that had a thermal conductivity that was pretty flat and pretty stable, and it's so actually you expose at 50 degrees Celsius, which is not an extremely high temperature, because 50 degrees is lower than the temperature that that material will expose on an Abu Dhabi roof. Okay, 50 degrees surface temperature, it's pretty kind of okay for the roof. And as soon as actually you retest the product after 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, the thermal conductivity basically shifts up. In other words, you anticipate to have used a material with a thermal conductivity of 0.02, and 6 months later, the thermal conductivity is 50% higher. Okay? And this is consistent not only for polyurethane, but it's also happening for polyisocyanurate. Now, when it comes to polyisocyanurate, you not only have the effect of the shifting up with the aging of the product, because the gas escape, but we also see another problematic aspect of this foam material. Thermal conductivity at low temperature of a polyisocyanurate typically is higher than an environmental average temperature. And the reason why the product does in this way, because the majority of the gases we use condensates around 5 to 6 degrees Celsius. In other words, in this range, the product has a gas inside, but in this range, the product has a liquid inside. And the heat transfer through a liquid is clearly higher than the heat transfer through a solid. And so the thermal conductivity of foam materials at a lower temperature gets increased by condensation effect into the matrix. Now, so using this knowledge over the last couple of years, we have started actually simulating and modeling real behaviors of products, not only in terms of thermal conductivity in static form, but also in terms of relative humidity and in terms of temperature. So this is something that we have been trying to push in Canada across legislation codes to actually have industry not to declare anymore their thermal conductivity value as a single value, because that's not really true. That's not really what a material will do. This is a bit more kind of closer to what a material will do in the field. So a material will not have a flat thermal conductivity no matter the condition. A material will probably have a thermal conductivity that will depend on temperature, will depend on relative humidity, and in reality will also depend on age of the product. So you have actually 3D surfaces when the material is fresh, and this kind of curve will actually increase, so will typically shift up once the material starts being old. Okay? Now what do we do with these kind of curves? And so I have all the curves for effective thermal conductivity for all the different products. You see here just an example, later on you will see a mirror example, but these are kind of the same polyurethane in pristine and in age condition, and not the single value, but the thermal conductivity value for different relative humidity, different temperature, and final actual effect. So what are we doing with this kind of studies is trying to look at the end of the day, if I know that material behaves in this way, so if I know that I'm a liar when I declare a thermal conductivity as a single value, what's the impact of this? Is this problematic for my modeling or not? Because these days, the majority of consulting job goes through simulation. So how can we actually improve our simulation of the real behavior of products? If you're actually familiar to WUFI, for example, this is something that German code have recently introduced to take into account the effect of thermal conductivity for moisture content in the layer. So you remember from Physical Technica 1, you probably did the Glaser method, okay? Remember you used it to do the Glaser method, and you used it to know when there was a condensation point and what was the water vapor, the pressure of the water vapor into the layer, and you used it to know what was actually the relative humidity. Now, these days, in 2016, the German code has actually required people to simulate an insulating layer knowing actually the effect of the relative humidity when it comes to the value of the thermal conductivity. Okay? And so WUFI, because actually it starts from there, because they keep actually updating according to the German codes, they have been starting allowing us to take into account the real behaviors of the product by taking into account the moisture content. And so here you see a couple of examples, and I want to give you the effect just to really kind of introduce you to the topic. Here you see a wall, and here you see a roof. Very traditional, not all insulating. We're speaking about 10 centimeter thickness of insulation in both layers. And here you see what's typically going on in the field. So this is actually the wall using a fiberglass, 10 centimeter thick fiberglass. And this is, you see in blue, the temperature of the wall. So this is something that dynamically is nothing more than the surface temperature of this actual insulating layer. And this is actually the thermal conductivity in the black line of the insulating layer. Same thing, for example, for this XPS. You see in kind of blue the temperature of the wall, and then in black the thermal conductivity. And what actually you see is that if the temperature gets higher, the thermal conductivity gets higher. And if the temperature gets lower, the thermal conductivity gets lower. In other words, every single time you do a manual calculation using the Fourier equation of the thermal conductivity, you pretend to think that thermal conductivity is a fixed value, okay? It doesn't change according to the conditions. But in reality, as soon as the temperature of a layer changes, then the thermal conductivity will change. Now, this in Perugia probably is not too problematic because the shift of temperature is not dramatic. But for people that were here yesterday morning at the beginning of my talk, and I was showing you the average temperature in Toronto. Today in Toronto we have 36 Celsius, but 5 months ago in Toronto at this time in the early morning, you probably had minus 36. So once you actually start having very huge shift of temperature, the fact that the thermal conductivity gets affected by the temperature will impact the value of the thermal conductivity of your layer. And here you see something that starts a bit more interesting. Polyisocyanates, I'm actually putting the PR code, which is actually called for polyisocyanates. They don't follow temperature and thermal conductivity. So far when I was showing you temperature and thermal conductivity, they were following each other. And if one and the other follow each other, then you can actually easily see the average temperature of the product will give you the average thermal conductivity of that layer. So it's not hard actually to be followed. But once actually the two layers are not linear anymore, because I remember that thermal conductivity across temperature of a polyisocyanates has this behavior, then it's really much harder to anticipate what's going on in the field. Now, because it's not easy, we have been starting monitoring. So if you remember the B-top outdoor facility I showed you yesterday on the roof, so we have a kind of, for those of you that were not here yesterday, in my university we have a similar kind of the test hub you have outside with the two little cubicles, but we have actually a similar one that gets coupled together on the roof. So we have started spraying different insulating layers, and we have put thermocouple at different thickness, measure the surface temperature, the maximum one, the minimum one, the average one, and measure it actually across temperature. So this is January and this is actually July, and measure the thermal conductivity of that layer effectively in the field, knowing the moisture content and knowing the temperature. Now what you see is that typically, for example, for the polyisocyanates, thermal conductivity in July is pretty stable. So in July, summertime, thermal conductivity of most of the foam materials do not really get affected a lot. And the reason why they don't get affected a lot is because they go up during the daytime and they go down during the nighttime. Okay? So the two effect, night and day effect, they typically compensate each other. But as soon as you start going towards the winter time and the temperature consistently gets below 0 degrees for days after day, then you get actually thermal conductivity significantly going up much more than you anticipated. In other words, if you see this graph, just to summarize, it's basically showing you that the thermal conductivity of this layer is 0.02324 in July when it's hot, and can go as high as 0.06, so 3 times higher when extremely winter time in Toronto. Okay? So as soon as the temperature goes to minus 20, the reality is these materials start condensing a lot of this gas, and as soon as the gas gets condensed, a lot of it transfers to that layer. Okay? So let's do a break here before we start, and we are going to see the effect in real building that we have been monitoring. But the trajectory that you're going to start seeing, starting from now, about these foam materials, is that you're going to start seeing the impact of different kind of layers in field once you start doing this real monitoring. Just to let you know, I've been only doing tests for big cities like Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal. We've been monitoring buildings in Montreal over the last year. But a lot of actually the people in North America, more and more often these days, are starting looking and being interested in what's going on above the Arctic, when like the regional Canadians have been living, or above actually Trondheim if you go to Norway. people are starting going to the field and starting to look at what's going on once that condition, it's pretty common, like very, very cold, very, very humid, what's going on to my envelope. And now my envelope in the field behaves differently from my theoretically dry condition, 20 degrees temperature, thermal conductivity assumptions. Okay? Okay, so let's do 5 minutes break and then we come. E poi c'è qua il pilastro, poi c'è un altro solaio, no? E qui loro ci vanno a appiccicare il carton ball con lo spider, sai, quel gancetto di acciaio con i 4 cose. Allora loro agganciano lo spider per proteggere lo spessore. Se mettessero, non so, per esempio fiberglass, una lana di vetro, avrebbero bisogno equivalente di 5-6 cm e quindi lo spider dovrebbe essere molto lungo, quindi in realtà molto lungo diventa poco rigido, no? Diventa un po' che si può rompere, quindi loro hanno interesse che lo spider sia molto corto per che gli annulla il momento, no? Sia proprio attaccato al solaio. Quindi per attaccarlo bene, un conto è che io metto dietro un pannellino di questi che foro per come se sono entrato nel solaio del tempio, un conto è che io mi devo staccare. Quindi in realtà c'ha un vantaggio grosso, cioè, ma anche se lo pago un po' di più.
Però se è piccolo di superficie.
Se è piccola la superficie e se io ottengo il vantaggio che in realtà sto sempre andando ad attaccare la facciata sul solaio con uno spessore minimale, in realtà il vantaggio c'è proprio nel processo di manifattura. Tant'è che questi qui ora, la società che lo porta a Toronto ce lo vende con un biadesivo dietro, quindi noi tagliamo la pellicola, lo appiccichiamo e poi mettiamo lo spider sopra, velocissimo, cioè è speso un po' di più, ma tu se non lo facevi, perché poi che succede? Non avendo spessore resta leggero, mi si attacca un po' con un po' di colla, diciamo, col biadesivo. Se io avessi la lana di roccia e avessi 5-6 cm di alta densità, come lo appiccico la lana di roccia? La lana di roccia ha uno spessore di 30 cm, alto 6, 7, 8 cm, ho problemi ad attaccarlo, cioè dovrei andarlo a punzecchiare ogni volta. Quindi, ecco, c'ha dei vantaggi in applicazioni molto specifiche, magari non di grande scala, però diciamo efficaci, che secondo me alla lunga permettono di giustificare una produzione. Sai, poi una volta che la produzione parte, è più facile fare l'economia di scala quando hai la scala di applicazione. Cioè è ovvio che se il prodotto è di nicchissima, c'è sempre il costo fisso non diciamo spalmato sul quantitativo, quando invece la produzione e l'adozione è...
No, quando c'è uno startup, diciamo, il prodotto sul mercato, il problema principale è quello.
Sì, quindi diciamo, sono tutti prodotti tendenzialmente che diciamo 5-10 anni di uscita tranquillamente. Ovviamente in questi 5-10 anni il segreto è risolvergli tutti i problemini. Uno è il costo, uno, non ti nascondo, è le certificazioni. Cioè, questi sono prodotti, nasce prima diceva, ma non è tossico? La prima cosa che la gente pensa quando vede una sostanza così volatile è questo qua è cancerogeno, mi fa lo stesso effetto dell'amianto. E lo capisco come atteggiamento, che io se respiro e inalo quella polvere mi si deposita sui polmoni. Quindi in realtà c'è un processo di studio che va fatto che è funzionale a questo tipo di rassicurazione. Infatti non sono neanche studi che facciamo da soli, devo dire la verità. Cioè la prima cosa che queste aziende si sono messi a fare, questi produttori, è lavorare con effetti sull'uomo.
Anche perché sennò il mercato non...
Sì, perché cioè, non avremmo grossi problemi in Canada, però è ovvio che in Europa senza le certificazioni. Io ho uno spin-off che lo commercializzo. E lo spin-off l'hanno fatto 3 ragazzi, 2 sono chimici e 1 ingegnere, quindi mangiamo la meccanica. E loro, la maggior parte degli studi che stanno facendo la spin-off si chiama Entropy. Lo trovi, cioè il sito puoi commercializzarlo, puoi comprarlo, il prodotto, cioè lo vendiamo anche. Vendiamo con una serie di problemi, ripeto, che non abbiamo come iniziare. Sì, lo potremmo vendere con tutti i problemi. Cioè, beh, il BAT, la corporate number è canadese, però. Non l'abbiamo mai venduto in Europa, ma non ne vedo il problema. Il plugin non abbiamo mai venduto, cioè, essendo uno spin-off universitario, no, ce lo vendiamo, facciamo monitoraggio, facciamo lo studio, diciamo, non abbiamo una scala di produzione che è orientata al market in maniera spinta, è orientata ancora a una ricerca.
È uno studio.
Una ricerca, diciamo, applicata, un po' di trasferimento, un po' di diffusione. Però senza questo non ci parlavamo poi di persone. Diciamo, di base. Si chiama entropy, lo puoi trovare. Come on, Lisa.
Andrea.
Com'è?
Andrea Nicolini.
Come mi richiamo tutte le persone dentro?
Le richiamo.
Perché se no non iniziamo e se non iniziamo non finiamo e se non finiamo non mangiamo. Ma non c'è niente, no?
Non è collegato.
Boh. Ok. Accetto anche la sfida che non vogliono seguire. Se per caso la dobbiamo aspettare, come le aspettiamo? Yeah, sure.
How do you perform the measurement for
Okay. At least actually I reply to a question.
Okay, thank you.
In my actually, okay, so thermal conductivity measurements. Super easy.
No, just which experimental technique do you use?
Yeah.
We had to gather hot plate and voltage.
So basically, typically thermal conductivity measurements are done using the Fourier equation. Okay, so you know, if flux is the product of thermal conductivity, R and temperature. Fair enough. So how do you typically measure in a lab? In a lab, according to the standard, what you do is basically you have a material, and what you want to create is you want to create the same condition that the Fourier equation, you know, basically assume. What they assume? They assume a perfectly heat conduction mode. So they basically assume that there is no radiation, no convection, and only conduction. How do you guarantee to have conduction? Is basically you need to have material in which you have a body at one temperature and then perfectly attach it to your sample, and then there is a body below and another temperature, and then these two temperatures are significantly different. That will generate, for example, if this is the hot plate and this is the cold plate, they will have to generate a flux that has to be completely unidirectional. Now, how that is typically done according to the standard? The standard says please take actually a material, flat as much as possible. So first actually thing you need to do is basically making sure that this surface is flat and then the below surface is completely flat. If they're not flat, for example, if you have a plaster that has kind of roughness, then you put a superconductive oil. And so you put an oil that is typically a wax. So you put this wax and makes actually a flat surface. Then once these two surfaces are completely flat, you have this body above and this body below. They will have to be completely kind of isothermal themselves. So in other words, this has to be hot, but isothermally hot. And this has to be cold and isothermally cold. Okay? So once this is hot and this is cold, the standard asks you to make sure that these two surfaces have a temperature of at least 10 degrees difference. So if this is, I would say 30 degrees, this has to be 20 or lower. It can be 15, it can be 10, it can be 0, whatever you want to have. Okay? So once actually you have this 30 and 20, what's going on? Well, there is actually a heat flux that gets generated by this significant temperature difference. And because the temperature difference is significant, you know that this flux is going to be highly unidirectional. Okay? So you basically attach a thermocouple here, you attach a thermocouple here, then on this surface you put another series of thermocouple. You typically put at least 10 thermocouple here, one in the center and then 9 around it, to see if this plate is homogeneous. You do the same thing here, so you have not one cable but 10 cables. They will give you temperature above and temperature below. And the standard requires you to have a difference between the thermocouples of no more than 0.2 degrees. So you need to have a completely homogeneous surface temperature above and a completely homogeneous temperature below. Okay? With the difference each other no more than 0.2 degrees. And then what you do, you put an heat flux sensor. Also flux, I saw you actually had yesterday below. The blue one disc, typically 8 centimeter. There is a disc which is really nothing more than a silicon junction. Okay? So you put the heat flux meter, and this will measure the watt that basically goes through the layer. Now, if you see this heat flux meter, we typically built our heat flux meter. I thought actually you purchased it. I mean, it's the most expensive part of this setup because the thermocouple costs you $2, and heat flux costs you typically $700 if you buy. Like it costs actually $10, $20 if you buy it yourself. Okay? It's two silicon layers attached together, where you actually measure the electric voltage between the two plates. Okay, so it's really, really simple to do itself. So you measure the path that goes through, so you measure basically this one. And then you know the temperature here and the temperature here, so you know this one. And so by basically dividing the heat flux that you have measured by the temperature, you obtain the thermal conductivity. Okay? A few tips in these measurements. This equation assumes that the heat doesn't get stored into the thickness of the material. But the reality is that the material has always a thermal capacity. So we'll always store a portion of the heat they will lose. So the heat will go from here, will have to enter here, but a portion will remain in the thickness of the material. So how do you limit the thermal thickness? Sorry, the thermal capacity, you limit the thermal thickness. So you typically do tests for 3, 4 centimeter, 5 centimeter. You never do, very, very thick layers. Okay? Because a thick layer will store a lot of heat. First thing. Second thing, the heat flux meter is 10 centimeter. Okay? You have a series of thermocouple. The reality is this kind of setup will always have some heat to escape in this direction. So you need to have a guard box. You need to kind of have a ring that limits the 2D effect. Because the Fourier equation only is valid for unidirectional heat flux. So typically, just to give you the sense of how to do this, these samples, it's at least 30 centimeter, more commonly 50 or 60 centimeter, and it's squared. Okay? So it's kind of 50, 50, 50, 50. And what you typically do, you put the thermocouple here. You put the thermocouple here. And you try to measure if there is heat escaping side by side. Okay? And so there are some tips to kind of correct these measurements, but this is basically the principle. You can build your own actually tool down, like in your lab easily. You just simply need a data acquisition for the flux. You need actually some kind of data acquisition for the thermocouples. You need to control the temperature across these ones. The problematic aspect of these measurements is how do you generate the cold plate very homogeneously? Because the hot plate homogeneously is easy, the thermal resistance. Okay, so you put an electrical resistance, you put voltage, and it's like your bathroom fan. Okay? Nothing more than that. Once you have electricity passing to a metal wire, that's warming up. And so this is easy to be generated. This is a bit more kind of problematic because here you need to create a kind of a chamber or a plate that will have an homogeneous temperature. So people here typically do high spikes, so they put high spikes in the back. There are different ways, depending on the budget you have. Okay, a very kind of professional device for thermal conductivity, typically these days $20,000, and it will fix for you all the problems of the chiller here, will fix you the side effect, will fix a series of things. If you don't have that budget, you want to build your own, you probably can build easily this machine for 3 to 4K. Okay? I mean, the real expensive thing is, the data acquisition system for thermocouples, because it needs to be a 20 channels digital system, and the influx, which is, 1K, basically 1,000 maximum. Does that answer your question?
So you use these in lab, like a gathered out plate or a heat flow meter apparatus, to have your experimental measurements of the
well, in the lab, yes. In the field, it's slightly different. In the lab, we have one of these.
Okay.
We have actually the Lambda HFM36. So if you actually Google it, we have a Lambda. The company Nietzsche, I think it's called. Nietzsche. The German company. You can Google it and you find it. Okay. In the field, it's slightly different. In the field, the apparatus remain the same. So you need a series of thermocouples, and then you have the flux meter. You try to measure the side effects, so the boundary losses, and then you basically divide the heat flux by the temperature delta, and then you will generate the thermal conductivity. And that's going to be an effective thermal conductivity because clearly in the field is going to take into account the fact this layer may have some moisture content. It will increase the temperature. The thermal conductivity may have, kind of gas escaping, all the kind of side effect. Yeah, so honestly, the only reason why we typically use the Nietzsche machine, we also have a kind of a prototype we built. Actually, we have two. I used it kind of 2 PhD students to build their own because I told them that I will never allow you to use like a commercial machine. I want you to use your own one. So they had to build in the first 2 months of their PhD. To really understand how thermal measurements are done. Okay? I think actually it's a training exercise for them how to build a thermocouple. Right? The good value of a commercial product is that typically it's easy to run a product with it. There is kind of a software, you set up the temperature being in here, you press OK, and 12 hours later, 1 day later, the machine will automatically print the result of the thermal conductivity with the graph. So it's kind of very, very easy to control it. But building your own, it's not hard. It's a good exercise. And in fact, the reason why I always like when students build their own tool is because when we go to the field, they will have a very clear understanding of the challenging in the lab, then they will use in the field for the monitoring of the real building. If you haven't done actually yet a study in a lab, when you go to the field, more troubles will arise. Okay, but if you have done and you have controlled all the challenges in the lab, then in the field it's much easier because you know how the digital logger, how to save data, everything gets actually much easier. Okay. Any other question? Okay, so where we actually stop. Tell me.
No, it's okay.
It's okay. No problem. Secret, okay. I'm not allowed to know these secrets, okay? What we have done before the break. So before the break, we saw the challenge of all the four materials and the challenge of the fact that their temperature profile is now regular, the gas escapes and these kind of things. I'm going to actually show you some of the agent test result we did with these products. And the reason why we were interested in this agent is because we went to the field and we realized that really the thermal conductivity after 1 year or 2 years was decreasing a lot for a lot of these foam products. Okay? And so the government wanted to know what to do with these kind of gases and how to really make sure that the companies were declaring their long-term value and not their original value. These days, last year, a new regulation was passed. The regulation is called LLTR, which is the long lifetime reference value. So now, companies do not declare anymore the single original value in pristine, freshly produced conditions. They also declare what's going on to the product once the product gets actually aged. Now, this is actually a series of the effect of polyurethane for different relative humidity exposure. Okay? Now, typically foam materials do the same thing that any other porous material will do. If the material is dry, see the blue line? Typically thermal conductivity is low. As soon as you start putting more moisture content, the materiality will shift a bit. Okay? Because more moisture content will take actually more humidity. Typically, if the foam material is an open cell, will take more moisture. If it is a closed cell, will take a small amount of moisture. An open cell is typically a foam that is soft to compress, because when you compress, the air escapes, and it escapes because it's open cell. And then you remove actually the compression and the air comes back. A closed cell is typically a foam that is really, really hard. It's called 3 kilograms per cubic meter. So basically, it's so hard that you can jump on it and it's still actually really, really hard. Typically the BASF sample that you have in your lab. But one of the good things of these products, which is a pretty good advantage, is that it doesn't allow a lot of moisture to penetrate. So if you see, even if the material gets exposed to a pretty humid environment, 95% relative humidity, it's almost actually equivalent to submerging the material into the water. It doesn't really take up a lot of that moisture. So these products, with some limits, have a very good moisture-related behavior. Okay? They don't suffer moisture. They suffer very little problem with moisture content, especially if you compare with mineral wool fiberglass, which really suffer a lot of moisture. So these are pretty good products when you have wet environments. So Southeast Asia or Vancouver or actually Miami, Florida. Every single place where you have a lot of humidity and you have the risk that while you're doing the construction it rains and water enters into the material, then you close the construction and the material is still wet. Well, these products typically behave very well with that kind of condition. Okay? Because you also need to think about this kind of challenge in the field. People don't think that the construction occurs in a few months. And while you're doing the construction, your construction gets wet. Then you trap everything, and then the material stacks with some humidity. That humidity will be in the envelope for much longer than you expect. While closed cell, they are pretty stable. As soon as you start going towards open cell, they start actually having a very high increase in thermal conductivity. Right? So open cells typically are not the best option when you have actually a moisturized or wet environment. Polyhydrogenate. Well, the problem of polyhydrogenate is still that even at kind of lower temperature, no matter the relative humidity content, they still suffer that kind of low temperature effect. Now, if you look at this, you also understand it's pretty problematic. If you buy a product whose thermal conductivity was declared as 0.025, then you put it into the field and it gets colder and gets humid, and the product basically acts twice worse. Okay? So this is the kind of gap that we were trying to fix and control. So we did actually similar studies to what we have seen yesterday with Energia into the lab with a series of long-term monitoring. Long-term monitoring included freeze-thaw cycles. For those of you that were not here yesterday, this is almost a normal freezing machine that actually is a climate chamber with a freezing machine. So basically it does all the temperature fluctuation that we want the material to do. Right? And they are active fact. Now the reason why we tested in the freeze-thaw is because if the material goes above and below zero, basically dilates and contracts a lot. And we wanted to understand how easy for a foam material is to have actually the gas escaping once it dilates and contracts. Because the material is what's warmer, has porosity that it becomes actually higher and bigger. So they go actually closer to the surface, so they go above and below, closer to the surface, and then become actually bigger. And you can see that typically polyurethane are really stable, so even kind of hundreds of cycles do not really lose significantly their thermal conductivity. And when you go to polyisocyanates, basically the effect becomes either polyurethane closed cell or polyisocyanates, the effect becomes really, really minimal. So these are materials that do not actually suffer that much their kind of dilatation process. Let me jump some slide, because I want actually to show you what we have done with these kind of things. So once actually we had, for all the products, so this is an highly dense closed cell polyurethane, which means, just to give you the sense, let me see if I can figure out a way to, fancy, highly dense closed cell polyurethane, but it is, if you go downstairs in the lab I saw yesterday, you had dowel boards like this thickness that you can jump on it. They are typically used on roof. What in North America we call inverted roof, because you can walk on the board and it doesn't destroy the board. And typically they come with a male-female junction. So it's easy to be realized because you can really stack them together easily to have a flat surface. And so this is actually the relative humidity, temperature, thermal conductivity graph for the different products you have seen so far. Okay? Now, just some discussion about this kind of graph. Okay? So this is typically how these days in Canada we issue certificates for products. So we don't issue anymore a certificate with a single thermal conductivity value. We issue a certificate in this way, okay, which is pretty interesting. We always put the value at the center, which is what actually in European context value, engineer will understand, but then we give actually the graph. And the graph for the majority of materials will always have this kind of slope. Higher temperature, higher thermal conductivity, higher relative humidity, higher actually thermal conductivity. Higher temperature, higher relative humidity, they combine synergically to give a very high thermal conductivity. Okay? Some variation is, for example, the fact that many materials above 93% in relative humidity, they don't take any more enough actually water. Okay? Because the water starts actually dropping in the porosity and doesn't allow other cells of water to arrive. Okay, so that's why it doesn't flat steadily, but basically flat a bit and convert towards a lower value. Okay? But this is really what you will expect for the majority of the product. You see, I changed it. This is an high density, this is a closed cell, and this is actually what you see for a polyurethane, or even worse, for a polyisocyanates. Now if you see this graph of the polyisocyanates, you start understanding the value of these products. High relative humidity, thermal conductivity increase. But the problem is here. Higher temperature, the thermal conductivity decrease. And as soon as you go towards colder temperature, the thermal conductivity increase again. And if that's not enough, look at the absolute scale of the thermal conductivity. Here, we were always looking at very small variation. The graph seems to be amplified. But in reality, the thermal conductivity for most of the polyurethane doesn't change that much. As soon as you jump into the polyisocyanates, the material basically becomes 3 times more thermal conductive. Okay? And so, in Europe, in Italy, according to the standard, you will only give the value of 20 degree, 50% relative humidity, so you will give this point. Okay? While in North America now, we give actually the entire surface area properties of the product. And if I need to do another interesting thing is that even this graph is not easy to be interpreted in the field, because if you have a thick layer of insulation that is, for example, in this wall, let's pretend for one second here you have an insulating layer. What's happening to this insulating layer is that the first batch of this insulation is going to be at 20 degrees. The last one, when it's super chilly outside, is going to be closer to the outdoor temperature. The first one will have all the moisture content that we are emitting right now. The exterior one is going to have the moisture content that is a bit more kind of closer to the outdoor condition. So even actually showing this kind of graph, still not enough if you don't really understand what's the real condition in all the thickness of the layer of the wall. Now again, this is typical if you're using a brick or a mortar or a concrete or a mineral wall, it's not a problem. Okay, so I don't want actually to give you the feeling that, oh, it's super important and you take into account these kind of things. Not at all. But if you're using these products, and this needs to be 10 times better than the normal product, you probably may want to know if in theory it's 10 times better, but then in practice it's only 2 or 3 times better. In other words, it's a relative evaluation. If moisture content, goes into a material that is already conductive, and so the water will make that material a bit more conductive, but it's not a big deal. But if moisture content goes to a material that almost doesn't allow any heat flux, and repetitively makes this product deteriorating their properties significantly, then people need to know that, because they pretend to have used a super good material, but then a wrong field application may actually really give a very bad situation. So this is another polyisochannelate. You see, this was a kind of a bit more regular. Look at this. You basically really jump with the relative humidity, no stop. So just to give you in a sense, you see these points, these blue points? What are they? Yeah, those are actually, each one of that point is one measurement setup. And the way in which you do that measurement setup, just to give you the sense, to go back to your question, is if you want to measure at 25 degrees, then typically you put what we have done here, 30 and 20. And so you basically say, oh, this material right now has 25.
So basically that surface is like an interpolation of all
yeah,
your
exactly, yeah.
measurements.
So in reality, this is one measurement point, one measurement point, one measurement point, one measurement point.
So this is very long. I mean, every measurement.
Well, it takes basically almost 10 days. And that's another thing of an automatic machine. An automatic machine will probably do, in no more than, kind of 4 or 5 days. Because as soon as you finish
all of them?
Yeah. And you know why? I tell you why. Look at all these points. They are very close to each other. Once the machine goes to minus 10, minus 20, it's easy for the machine, if it is automatic, to then do the test again at minus 12, minus 15, minus 18. While you have to do everything by yourself, the machine will take forever to reach minus 18. And then it's in the middle of the night. It stops, it goes back to environmental condition, and the following day you need to set up again a point at minus 20, and the machine needs to go back to minus 20. So it will take actually half day just to reach minus 20. Yeah, so basically it becomes much more interesting to tell to the machine, as soon as you have finished this test, do another test. And so, look in this way. When we do minus 30, minus 20, we got basically minus 25 in the average. Okay? So we got this, oh, it's not even in this one. So let me actually do an example that's a bit more. So if we put 5 degree here and minus 15 degree here, on average, we are basically testing at minus 5. Correct? The average between is minus 15 and plus 5 is minus 10. In other words, there are 10 degree here and 10 degree here. Okay? So we are basically getting this point. Okay? And so the machine will do this line easily in one day, and then we'll do this other line, and then we'll do this other line, and then we'll do these other 2 lines. Okay? Another good thing of an automatic machine is that we typically in a climate chamber, we put the sample at 0 degree, at 0 relative humidity, basically in oven. Okay? We dry the material as much as possible. Then we set up the other climate chamber at 50% relative humidity, or 70% relative humidity, or 80% relative humidity. Then we take off one sample, we start the test, we get one line, and as soon as one line is done, we take another sample that was exposed to 80% relative humidity, we wrap it to allow the moisture content not to escape, so typically a polyethylene wrap, and then we allow another test. And we do the same thing with all the products. Okay? Now, what do we do with this? Okay? What can we really realistically do with these kind of things is basically start doing the same thing that you've seen before. July, January. And then if you see this line, these top and lower lines, here are almost overlaps, are the center line of an insulation of 10 centimeter, and then the external layer or the internal slice, basically. So this is actually the exterior, this is the exterior surface, this is the interior surface, and this is on average how the material behaves. This is only the thermal conductivity. And you see, this is pretty interesting because you realize that summertime materials are really stable, wintertime material becomes much less stable, and then the variation from inside to outside becomes actually much bigger in some days. So the external layer versus the internal layer, they really are 2 different materials.
How do you do the measurement at the external and internal layer?
Super easy. In field or in lab? Or in simulation?
In every situation.
Well, in field you put the thermocouple at different thickness. So you put the nail.
Okay, so you just use, okay.
Yeah, you put the nail and you have a thermocouple at different thickness. So each signal is different temperature sensor, and each couple, it's an invasive form because a thermocouple needs to punctuate the material, but it's not really problematic. In lab, more or less the same thing. You have this material, we put a nail, so we have the temperature profile everywhere. In simulation, I don't know if you know roofing, or if you know even Energy Plus, basically will allow you to know the temperature at each point. Not differently from what you do when you do a laser method. Think about laser method, physical technical one, okay? Everybody has done at least once. If I tell me the condensation point, you measure the condensation point and the interface. But if I tell me the temperature of that layer, it's centimeter back from the surface, you can measure it. You assume a linear behavior in the thickness of the layer, and you know the temperature of each layer. And if you know the temperature, and you know the relative humidity, then you know the thermal conductivity. And so this plot is nothing more than the thermal conductivity once you know day by day, so kind of instant by instant, temperature and relative humidity, boom, you plot actually thermal conductivity. Okay? So it's kind of not hard to do. This was a wall with the external kind of foam insulation, polyisogenerated, and this is actually a roof. Okay? So you probably don't know, but we use actually CHAMPS, a software that my department developed. So we have a kind of an internal movie software that we distribute for free. It's kind of, you can freely download CHAMPS. So CHAMPS, these are actually output of CHAMPS. So this is a software proprietary of Ryerson. We actually distribute it for free, just actually as a marketing campaign. But we do measurements of, conditions of the envelope. And one of the things you see is that, you may easily find walls that, because it's an exterior side and because you get some moisturized condition or condensation, boom, the thermal conductivity becomes much higher than theoretically expected. So instead of doing an analysis point by point, you have the entire profile in the 3D of the envelope. And you can do this kind of analysis 2D or 3D in the notes. Okay? So, I think actually the message has passed, okay? So what's going on now? Now, one of the things we are currently working is Okay, now we have seen the effects. We have seen, in the field, temperature will affect the thermal conductivity, moisture content affect the thermal conductivity, aged conditions, temperature, thermal dilatation effects. What are we currently doing? Exactly why I'm speaking, while I'm here relaxing in Umbria. My PhD students are basically working on trying to understand how to fix this problem. Okay, how to mitigate, how to create new products that will mitigate these problems. Okay, few directions. Number one, we are trying to look inside the products. So these are SEM of those two polyisocyanates and polyurethane. Okay, this is how the material looks when you see it. When the material is fresh, and what you see when the material gets actually aged. And we're trying to understand by looking at the matrix of the material, what's really going on and what makes this material losing some properties. Is the water content going into the closed porosity or is going into the open porosity? So where this failing mechanism starts. Okay? Another thing that we are doing is try to understand how much of these gases escape and how much of these gases remain there, and when they actually escape, which gas gets replaced by what? Is moisture content entering? Is other air gases that enters into the foam? What's really the composition in chemistry of the foam 1 year after I actually produced it? So we do a lot of gas chromatography these days because we need to understand what's the gas inside it, and it's a kind of look that we have been doing over the last kind of 1 year. I have two PhD. One is only working on polyurethane, one is only working on polyisocyanates. Okay? So this is more or less what we are currently doing on foam materials. Okay? Next. I think actually I only have another hour, right? More or less? Yeah. Okay, so because I realized that some of you are probably not chemistry, and probably is a good way to really give you an overview of what we've been doing. The plan is, as you can realize, next plan is to give you a series of kind of very snapshots of things that we've been doing over the last few years that are not about nanotechnology, but they are still about the sustainability of the built environment. Okay? So apologize me if it is not fully coherent moving forward, but the idea is just to really give you an incentive to see what we have been doing in my department. So number one, we have been working a lot on greening the city and greening the built environment. Okay? Then I will tell you what that means. Everything started from my master thesis. Okay? Let me jump directly to what's going on. So my master thesis was about really building some green roof on some test cells and trying to see the effect and trying to understand the thermodynamics of the green roof. Okay? So at that time, it was 10 years ago, people loved to do simulation, and so then I lost the attitude to do simulation. It's not anymore something that I really like. But at that time, the intention was, okay, I put kind of greenery system, green wall, green roof, let me understand what's the parametric analysis of the value that this may generate. And at that time, one of the big challenges was that, 10, 15 years ago, people had no idea how to model a green roof. Everybody realized at that time that there was a lot of thermodynamics behind it. Because here there is conduction through the soil layer, but there is convection above, and the convection comes from the wind, but there is radiation, but then, more leaves, less leaves, create different radiation patterns. So how do I model a greenery system? How do I generate some different things, okay? And then, I think 15 years ago, I have a model that, I generated, and it's nothing more than a thermodynamics balancing of this. So in one equation, you understand energy never gets created or destroyed, so you put the solar gain, and then, you basically balance all the flux modes that you can generate in a greenery system. And if you see my early publication, 2010, 2011, you see kind of studies where for different climates, I was working on different thickness of soil, different insulation, different leaves, different trees, different plants, and these kind of things. Okay. When I moved to Toronto, then I found in my department that green roofs were pretty interesting. And the reason why they probably hired me because they wanted actually to kind of implement more kind of research activity on green roofs. And the reason for that is because the city of Toronto was kind of competing for becoming one of the greenest cities in the world. They were putting a lot of attention to the urban agriculture and the greenery of the city. And the Department of Architecture wanted to be kind of an expert in green roofs and kind of green infrastructure. So I was a good candidate for what they were looking for. And so I used my startup grant. When you get R&D in a North American university, you typically get pretty good pocket of money. And so we got 2 people, me and another colleague, that does urban agriculture, and we put all the money together, we applied to different grants, and we built actually a green roof lab. Okay? So me and Liat, which is my kind of colleague that we have been working on together, this is the CN Tower of Toronto. But what you see here, we built 58 different green roofs. Okay? So we went on the roof, we said, you know what? We want to build a green roof. So everybody was expecting this green roof with our money. And everybody was saying to us, oh, it's going to cost you a fortune, you will never be able to do the entire roof. I said, no, I'm not going to do one green roof, I'm going to do 58 green roofs. And so you guys, you're stupid, that's never going to happen. But basically what happened was that we put students, very bad years, third year of architecture, and each one of them had to build basically a little green roof. Okay? So we designed what we were looking for, and what we actually started looking is what kind of real design of the green infrastructure can actually survive in a better way in Toronto, and which will be the benefit of each one of these different combinations. When I'm speaking about combination, just to give you the sense, by going in this direction, we are reducing more and more the thickness of the soil from 30 centimeter down to 10 centimeter. And then we are moving from dry species of plants down to wet species of plant. And then 3 years ago we started testing different green walls. Okay? And so once everything was built, we purchased all the possible available with the money we had sensors. So we had a series of albedo meter here. We had thermocouples inside with flux in the middle of the soil, so we were able to generate all the flux and try to understand how to balance this model for different kind of characteristics of the green roof. When I'm speaking about green roof characteristics, that basically means thermal conductivity of the soil. So there is the other side of the grid slab. We use different actually soils. Okay? Organic soil and inorganic soil. So freshly kind of ground soil and recycled soils. Another thing that we actually compared each other were different density of the plants, typically assessed through the leaf area index, which means how many leaves you have actually per square meter of the roof. And then we tested from this side to that side different combination of more dry species or more wet species, and when we go towards wet species, we start irrigating with different kind of modes. So if I irrigate a lot the green roof, then I'm putting a lot of water on my roof. If I put a lot of water, okay, I obtain some evaporative cooling effect, but I also am obtaining the fact that my roof will become essentially much more thermal conductive. Is that going to be a problem or not, that my roof has a pond on top of it? So this is kind of, I don't have, time, and probably doesn't make too much sense to go over all the single results, but as you can imagine, by having actually a parametric lab, that is a real lab, what we have been doing is just a series of monitoring, and then publications over publication over publication of different kind of results. Okay? And now, these kind of results have been, generating a guideline for the City of Toronto, where basically the City of Toronto for different species, recognize different credits to the client and to the general contractor that adopts different kind of combination of this green roof. Currently, one of the things that we are doing is that half of this green roof, this one, has been covered with different PV systems. We are looking at the synergy between a cool roof or a green roof with different PV panels on top of it. And the idea is basically locally cooling down the atmosphere to make sure that the electric circuits in the PV panel will work at a lower temperature and will be more effective and more efficiency may generate by having a green infrastructure below the PV panel. Okay? So if you go online to the Green Lab, you see all the results. And one of the results that we are really proud of is kind of the series of photos that we can generate day by day. So if you go today, just right now, and you go to the Green Lab web page, you will see actually all the green roofs we have, and you will see actually how it looks like the plant today. So we are monitoring all the different 58 roofs, see what's going on, and we can remotely decide that I want to irrigate or not irrigate a plant and try to understand how this may impact actually the effect of the green roof. A similar but different study, we use that approach in order to build different little lamps. Okay, what are lamps? These are really cubicles, 1.3 meter by 1.3 meter. So there it is. And it was following year of the green infrastructure course. So every year, students need to leave the department by having left us something. When they left us, we had actually this one. Okay, so these are a series of cubicles, not differently from what you have basically outside this building, but your cubicles are gigantic. Our cubicles are pretty limited, and what we are being actually doing is a couple of things. Number one, comparing the best optimal green roofs that we were able to kind of look at. Okay, I can give you the results. Our top ones were 12 centimeter of an organic soil with a sedum density of 0.1. Okay, but different locations may actually have and result in different kind of optimal combination. So don't take actually the results for Toronto in Perugia for free and for granted, because that's clearly not going to happen. So in this case, we look at the different green roofs, and then we monitor it inside the different units, and we start understanding what is the negative impact of a green roof. Is really a green roof always going to be super good? And the reason why I'm saying that is because it was clear from a thermodynamic balancing that the green roof may act as, I would say, an additional thermal resistance on a non-insulated roof. Fair enough, that's okay. But if my roof is not insulated, and so I have actually an old construction and I'm retrofitting by putting a green roof, what's going to be the effect during summertime? When the green roof will probably help me in providing some cooling effect in the middle of the day, but what's going on over night time? When basically that green roof will be a very hot mass on top of my roof that is still there. And the reason why this was of interest for us is because basically the city of Toronto started basically granting for free, so giving money back for all the costs that owners of single house had spent by putting a green roof on top of their attic. So in other words, there was a tax credit that the city of Toronto was recognizing to allow all the roofs of all the single house to go towards kind of a green roof construction. Now, theoretically speaking, that was great, because we have all these kind of house that at one point typically gets converted towards a green roof. Fair enough. But the problem of that is, a lot of people started complaining about the fact that they were going back home, and then repentantly in the middle of the summer, overnight, after they had spent an entire day in the cooling office that used to be, repentantly that kind of attic or second floor space started becoming more and more actually uncomfortable, because it was warmer and warmer by the effect of that warm mass on top of the roof. Okay? So we had to study kind of how to ventilate, how to do these kind of things. And again, don't take for granted the results, but basically we came out with an optimum thickness of the soil. So soil was in the range of 12 centimeter. For those people that were able actually to only put 5 or 6 centimeter, depending on the structural strength of the soil. Basically, the request was to kind of ventilate with a minimum amount of ventilation, so either fan or at least a number of minutes of windows opening in order to kind of generate that. Now, that model, if you go to the grid club generator, has actually the capability to give you the results also for the city of Perugia, but just as a simulation. Okay? So you can select a different city and you can see the effect of different green roofs. So even in your house, basically, you can set up some parameters of your house and then come up with the benefit that you can have in each city according to the weather file that Energy Plus allows. So I don't know if Energy Plus has a weather file for Perugia, but if he has, basically the system automatically takes actually the Energy Plus weather file database and generate the green roof saving of your house. Okay? So it's kind of another series of applications that goes into the direction that we've been kind of trying to implement more and more recently. The fact that we introduce some new knowledge that then people need to use. Last year study, because every year we do this green roof architectural studio, so we have students that need to do something. We look at the coupling between water ponds, fontaines, and other water kind of effect and green roof. And the reason is because recently in North America people are starting pushing the world of blue roof. I don't think actually it's that common in Europe yet, but basically in a city like Toronto, you've seen the transformation of the city of Toronto, and you've seen that basically we are destroying completely the gardening and putting towers. And the urban rainwater infrastructure is pretty old. Okay? It's still the same. So the reality is that the city of Toronto these days is giving credits in order to have roofs that instead of actually running out the water as soon as it rains, are able to store the water for some minutes, half an hour, 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, and then slowly actually having the water rain off. And the idea is to basically make sure that while you do all the surface impermeable by increasing the number of construction, you compensate it by having the capability of helping the rainwater system to be balanced. So these days what's going on is, just to give you the sense, the majority of the towers in Toronto have typically a large green roof, which, really the good value of a green roof in Toronto is not really an environmental safety feature. Because if you put the green roof on the 70th floor, in reality there is no butterfly that will fly there, okay? So forget about all the environmental benefits from a biology perspective. So the ecology doesn't get affected by a green roof on the 70th floor, let's be honest. But the good thing is that the water will drop in deep into the soil, will have to percolate through the soil, and will take actually some minutes before going out. Now those minutes are valuable when you have this extreme rain event, that everything is happening very quickly, okay? And because that is not even enough, a few minutes, these days basically buildings get designed with the capacity to create a little pond. So on top of the roof, you have actually the prescription to generate up to 50 centimeters of water that slowly has to rain out, okay? And the idea is that this little pond doesn't really create any significant structural issue, because you realize in a city like Toronto, but in the entire Canada, you need to be ready for 2 meters of snow in any case. So that capability to have a pond on top of your roof is part of the boundary condition of your climate, but it may help a lot the resilience of the urban management rainwater strategy of your city. Okay? So for example, this is the way in which we have retrofitted the entire campus. This is where we are. Okay. So this is architectural science building, this is engineering building, this is physics, chemistry, science and math. And you see, for example, this building right now, it's completely a green roof. This is a photo from Google Map 1 year ago, I think, when they were converting the engineering roof for a completely green roof. You see the green roof under construction. So this is basically what's going on and how the city of Toronto is responding to this effect. Another thing that Anna asked me to put, and has very little to do with what we have discussed in these last 2 days, but I think actually it's good to at least let you know, is one of the aspects of this kind of green roof initiative of Toronto has been really kind of directed towards the value for urban intelligence mitigation strategy. Now, the good side of a city like Canada is that typically people live in the suburbs. So we have a pretty good side of the value of green areas. But what's going on in the financial district, like in all the North American cities, that you don't get actually any green system anymore. So the green roof and green wall kind of philosophy and trend were ways to kind of introduce some green aspects into the core of the city. And so what we have been doing is for the city of Toronto, with Hashem, you probably have heard about him. Hashem used to be in Toronto, so when actually, I literally almost took his place, basically, when he moved to Montreal. And so we worked on the effect of greening actually the downtown core of Toronto. Okay? Both simulation modeling, a lot of green roof analysis. These days, actually, every single building with more than 2,000 square meter, which means every single building in Toronto, has to have the entire roof covered with green roof. So Toronto counts almost 2,000 green roofs currently in the city of Toronto. Okay? If you go actually on the cityoftoronto.ca/green roof, you see all the photos. Everything needs to be managed. And one of the interesting aspects that is happening in Toronto is, people put the first investment cost in the green roof. But historically, we have realized that a lot of these green infrastructure have a cost of maintenance. So the owner, once the construction gets built and gets completed, they don't maintain it anymore their infrastructure. Okay? A lot of Chicago green roofs, for example. If you go to Chicago used to be one of the cities with the largest concentration of green roofs, and they're typically all died. Okay? Because there was not any incentive, any policy, any kind of initiative to make sure the green roof, which is an alive, basically, environment and microsystem, keeps alive. Okay? And so the city of Toronto is doing a pretty good job in monitoring the green roofs that are available and trying to evaluate day by day their impact. Okay? And that's actually especially true in the core of Toronto. Now, do I have actually another 10-15 minutes at least? Yes? Okay. Sorry?
15 minutes.
Okay, so plenty of time. So, another last little kind of niche of activity that we've been doing. It's about how to implement all the things we have seen yesterday, especially, at the context of an entire kind of portion of the city. Okay? Now, City of Toronto has a policy for the 2030 greening of the core of Toronto. I don't know if you have heard, but Amazon is putting the headquarters of Amazon in basically the core of Toronto, which is here on the lake. So there has been a lot of initiative to greening the city center. And so one of the initiatives I was actually involved with recently is trying to understand how all the modeling that we have seen over the last 2 days can be implemented not at the little macro scale of a single building, but at the scale of the entire city, okay? Or at least actually a portion of the city. Now this goes back to my PhD thesis, okay? So this is actually the city of Molfetta, which has a very, very interesting case study because all the core historic center of the city of Molfetta, which is kind of 25 kilometers from Bari, so in the Puglia region, southeast coast of Italy, it's completely public. Okay? Not differently from what you see in Matera, there was a law that basically asked all the people to leave actually the core of the city. Everything became public, and then nowadays they are restoring and retrofitting everything and giving to social family for social housing application. Okay? So because there is a huge portion of public real estate ownership in the city, the council of the city of Molfetta wanted to know how to basically balance the energy bill in the entire core center of the city. Okay? So 7 years ago, 8 years ago, we did the energy map of the city of Molfetta. So we rebuilt the entire city of Molfetta. We started running simulation of different initiatives. We started actually prioritizing the things that actually they should have done. And then we repeated the same thing for Bari. Okay? So this is the city of Bari, 25 kilometers, a bit more south. And what you see here, it's neighbor by neighbor in the city of Bari, the kind of typology that prevails in those kind of part of the city, the kind of typology of construction that prevails in the part of the city, and the analysis of what actually is the part of the city that is public or social housing or any kind of public ownership related aspect, they can be prioritized and in which way. Now, that's actually when I was in Italy, but then over the last 6 years, I move it to Canada. Okay? So this is actually how that line of research has evolved currently in Canada. So this is actually the core downtown of Ottawa. Ottawa is basically my capital because Toronto is not the capital of Ontario, it's Ottawa. So we basically go to Ottawa for any kind of activity related to research. And the core of Ottawa was modeled in our department by actually looking at all the different kind of main characteristics of the structure of the city. Now, to give you the sense of it, this is how we generated the different models. Okay? So we have like an aerial photogrammetry of the city of Ottawa. We use a Google map to know the height of the building. So we had any kind of good student / slave / something differently. Please remove the slave from the record. But the reality is, he was so smart and fast that he was able to rebuild a 3D scenario of the core of Ottawa and was able to calibrate the scenario with the electricity and gas grid demand in the city of Ottawa. So before calibration and after calibration, you see the red line of the average result, and then you see the white is the annual calibration and the blue fit is actually the monthly calibration. So we started running basically using Amazon as a cloud, the output of the energy demand either monthly or annually for different actually aspects of the entire city of Ottawa. Well, the core down of Ottawa. Okay? What we did with that. So what we did with that was trying to understand if the phase change material that we have discussed yesterday could be used to shift the energy demand from one building to another one. So originally we started actually creating the idea to flux heat from one topology to another topology. And the idea was basically making sure that the cold air that is in an office at the end of the day, how to shift that cold air into the house to basically pre-cool down those houses while people were arriving toward their house. Okay? More recently, that has been done in Toronto. So this is the city of Toronto. CN Tower, this is Ryerson University, this is kind of the grid, here is my department. So this is the CN Tower, this is our department. What we're doing for the 2030 District Initiative is how to basically manage in a controlled way the energy demand of that entire core of Toronto. Okay? Now we're doing basically three things currently. We're doing deep leak effect, which is basically pre-cooling our houses and condos and office buildings by using the lake. So we take actually air from inside the building, we pump into the lake, and the lake typically has a temperature between 5 and 6, 7 degrees, and then it comes back. And the only value of that kind of mode, instead of using the air, is that the cost of pumping still doesn't really reach the cost of fully conditioning the air internally. So we basically cool down the core of Toronto at the price that is in the range of 7 cents per kilowatt hour of cooling peak, while if you were doing with an heat pump without using the lake effect, it will cost actually 2 to 3 times more. Okay. One of the things we have been doing is the Ryerson campus, which is here now as a thermal energy battery that we are actually using an exchanger with PCM to convert lab actually demand with office demands. Okay? And the material that we are using there is the paraffin we saw yesterday. Okay? So the battery has actually a 500 kilowatt hour kind of demand. So it's pretty kind of good in terms of capacity. And we are actually converting office and labs demand. Okay? Now clearly, that's not done by me alone at all. I mean, there is an entire group that I direct, but the group is pretty active. There are currently 3 postdocs, 4 PhD students, and a series of master students. And probably more importantly, that's done because somebody gives us money to do this kind of stuff. Because otherwise, when you are in North America, you realize the funding agency, it's #1 request. But what is more important is that the majority of the fund that we get is to really try to implement the things that we start. So pilot project that gets applied, are pretty kind of much more chance of success than anything that is done just in a lab. So we did the solar decathlon in 2015, the house that you have seen yesterday. We repeated the soil decathlon in 2016 for China, and now we are now doing another soil decathlon for Canada in 2020. A lot of really prototype houses or really kind of energy plants for real kind of conditions are currently done, just because the country is always looking for kind of the technology transferring up and just at the rate of actually our fundamental research. So we don't do only fundamental research, we try always to apply it. Okay, so before I close, here you see some of the references which I think are worth it to mention, and before I show you other slides, let's see if you have questions, and I need to actually show you something. I'm good, that's the reality. The only question is when this is going to end and where is actually lunchtime.
Maybe I have a question.
Yeah.
Even if I couldn't follow the whole
It's okay,
course.
no problem.
When I arrived, you showed the experimental fields of green roofs over the roof. I would like to know which are the sensors you put over the...
So each actually, so I can actually, probably it's easier if I design it, because it's... So the grid lab, so the lab that is on the roof of the architectural science building, has 58 of that cell, but those are only those are open green roof. In other words, here there is air. Okay, so we didn't close it. Okay, so that's important to understand, because the second lab that I showed you, that has the cubicles, we also monitor a lot what's happening below it. In this case, the green roof is just actually on 4 different kind of slots, so there is not really that much. And what we measure is, there are 6 different thermocouple tips, okay, at different thickness. Okay, so typically we have a surface temperature here, we have a bottom surface here, and now we have a series of 1 here. And the reason why there are 6, we don't really need 6, but often they fail. Because there is water, there is plant, there are roots. When you build actually a green roof, you need to be aware of the fact that one of these thermocouple may easily fail because a root destroys or moves, or is not where it should be, for whatever reason. Even the soil, if it rains and it's very strong rain, the soil will compress, and so the thickness is also not easy to be kind of understood. So having a series of thermocouples help you mitigating the effect of real field application measurements. Then we have an albedometer for each one. We have a moisture content sensor, so we measure actually how much moisture it goes. We also measure the rain off of the water, because some of them have a rain off, not all of them, but many of them we are measuring the speed of percolation, because again, the idea of the project was to try to help the city to mitigate the resiliency against actually very strong and short rain events. And then we have an influx meter at the bottom and an influx meter in the middle of the thickness of the soil. So overall, we collect something like 15, 16 sensors, measurement points every 3 minutes. So right now, I think actually we started doing every 10 minutes. At the beginning, we started with the idea that we had to collect with a very high density. So every kind of people were thinking even a few seconds, and then we said, no, let's go for minutes. Then we actually realized that 3 minutes or 10 minutes doesn't really change that much. So right now we are actually collecting every 10 minutes. And one of the things that it's interesting when you are in Canada is all the data you collect has to be freely available. So you can actually download all the things. There is not really something that's micro-arbitrary. It's basically governmental data. It's clear that you understand I delay a bit the publication to just actually publish a paper and then release all the data. But that's not information that I pretend to think is my own information. Like the general approach, when I sign a contract for research, it's always with Queen Elizabeth, which is for whatever reason is the person that gives me money. It's not the government of Canada, it's Her Majesty the Queen, so I sign always an agreement with Her Majesty the Queen that this is actually property of the Commonwealth, and all the results are actually property of the Commonwealth. So basically, it needs to be at least accessible for UK, Australia, and a bunch of other airlines plus Canada, and at that point I always approach the fact that, okay, everybody can have it. Because if UK and Australia can have it, there's no reason why other people shouldn't have it. Yeah, it's a kind of, first time you need to sign a kind of agreement, you suffer a bit that night, but then you get used to it. It's not my fault. Everybody has to do it. But it's not really kind of that bad in reality, because I realize that more and more often, and even journals these days are going towards that direction. Publishing the data or giving access to the data is first of all considered a kind of an insurance for the quality of the work you've done. The fact that people have access to the data makes whoever is going to read your data a bit more confident that you've done a good job, because he has access to your data. And second, I think at the end of the day, nobody's really going to read those data. But if somebody wants, I don't have a problem. I know I always will get credit for it. And so at the end of the day, somehow it's really students putting together test sets. My role is a coordination work. Okay. So for being just a coordinator, should I really actually own the data and not being able to give the data to everybody? And last but not least, the reality is, when you do a lot of things, there is a lot of other things that you would like to do and you don't have time to do it. So if somebody takes the data and does it, I don't have a personal problem with it, because otherwise it's kind of a lost opportunity of the data that sits on the desktop and nobody's doing anything. I mean, there is no value for anybody. Okay, so let me do some housekeeping work. And the housekeeping work is to basically, I know you have it, but because I brought and because it doesn't make sense to bring back to Toronto, really it doesn't make sense to bring back to Toronto, I need to distribute it. I don't know why I'm involved in the conference, but I am, so it's too late to tell you why. So this is a conference we are organizing next year. It is in Italy, so you're more than happy actually to consider coming. So let me actually, and then this one I will give to Anna. She has it. Oh. And last but not least, so I don't know if you know the XXXIII conference. It's kind of, the title is Indoor Air Quality, Ventilation, and Energy Conservation, and it's kind of a conference done every 3 years where we try to combine sustainability feature when it comes to really hard science topics, so kind of indoor air quality and energy saving, but from a mechanical engineering point of view. And never was done in Europe. Actually, it was done in Europe once, but it was not Europe. Never was done in the south of Europe. And so typically it goes back and forth from Canada or United States to Korea or Japan, where we have actually the last 6th edition of the conference. So because they have decided to go to Italy, it makes sense, being a Canadian, to be an ambassador in Italy. Here we are. So thanks for your attention, and feel free to reach me anytime you want. I'm actually going to be able to be here today and tomorrow. So if you have any questions, I'm really around. Okay? Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So basically, it's soon after Rome. We coordinate with Rome. So the idea is that people do Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday in Rome, and then Thursday, Friday, and Saturday in Bali.
Really?
Yeah, it's fully coordinated with Rome.
Because we are for sure going to Rome.
Oh yeah, everybody is going to Rome. Yeah, for sure. No. I'm the first one going there. Don't worry about it.
Okay.
Yeah, no. The idea is that Rome will start on Sunday afternoon, and then we land on Wednesday at lunchtime at 2 o'clock, and then basically that will allow people to. Rome bar is going to be 3 to 4 hours, so by leaving at 3, 4, 5, 6 p.m. on Wednesday afternoon, you will reach Bari probably at whatever time, 8, 9, 10 p.m. and then the day after we start Yakta. And the idea is that that's going to be the simulation conference, while this one is going to be basically real measurements, kind of things that are not done there. So basically the idea is that the two things are complementary. They're really not going to be competing at all each other. In fact, the same people are people. Okay? Other question? Yeah. I think actually the wrong one has a deadline for upstart. It's almost approaching. I think
Yes,
it's the end of this.
end of July.
Yeah, I think it's the end of this month. Well, that one has a bit more kind of.
November, right?
Sorry? Yeah, I think it's November. Yeah. Well, I think it's November 1st, which I find a bit strange because November 1st. I mean, if you put October 30th, it's okay. But if you start entering November, it's easy actually to anticipate that there's going to be a delay with an extension of the deadline beyond November 1st. Whatever. Yeah, so you have actually another 3 to 4 months basically. Okay, so thank you. And again, you have my contact, correct? You have this
Last
presentation.
question. Could you send me the presentation? The key. Yes.
You have the key, presentation is there. Actually, no, you can always take the presentation because you're on the desktop in any case.
Okay. Oh,
So
perfect.
basically, I'm not going to remove from the desktop.
Okay.
So anytime you want, if you have access to that computer,
Yeah,
which I have no
yeah.
idea if you have, but if you have access to that computer, then automatically you have.
Sì.
I mean, I can't send you because it's, you know, it's 200 slides and it's not gonna.
It's doing.
Yeah, it's 12. Yeah, it's not gonna fly, you know. I mean, it's always gonna be blocked either on my side or your side, and somebody would think that it's just a spam. It's stupid.